The afternoon stretched itself across Route 66 like melted amber, thick and slow and shimmering with heat. The light from the sun was the kind that made even the dust look holy. Every mile of that road hummed with the sound of engines that had seen too much of America. Inside the diner, the air trembled with smaller sounds, all alive in their own rhythm. The coffee pot hissed as it poured through the filter, the grill breathed and popped, and the jukebox crooned an old country song that had probably been stuck in there since the 70s. The world outside might have been moving fast, but in here time had its own pulse. Emily Carter moved through it like she belonged to its tempo. Her hands remembered every corner of this place. She carried a coffee pot in one hand and 3 mugs in the other, pinky curled to steady the third. Steam curled around her wrists and left little pearls of moisture on her skin. She smiled at the 2 long-haul drivers in the corner booth, the kind of smile that felt like warmth. Even when her back ached from the 12-hour shift, her apron was faded, its blue washed to pale gray, the smell of detergent. Fighting a losing battle against grease and coffee. "Top you off?" she asked one of the drivers, her tone soft but firm, her words rounded from long practice. He grinned, eyes bleary with fatigue. "You keep me awake and out of the ditch, honey. Then I'm doing my job," she said, pouring the coffee until it reached that exact point below the rim where it would not spill. Her mother had once told her that people trusted you if you knew where to stop pouring. She had never forgotten that. The bell above the door gave a tired ding. Emily did not look up immediately. She knew that bell, the way it dragged just a little on the last note. Her routine kept her safe. Booth 2 always needed a refill. The counter needed napkins. The teacher near the window left exact change because that was all she had. If Emily moved right, if she stayed in motion, the day would stay together. Motion meant control. And control meant she could almost forget the sight of her father's trembling hand that morning, as he had signed for his medication. She could almost forget the numbers written in the back of her notebook, numbers that never stopped multiplying no matter how many tips she counted. Manny, the cook, slid a plate onto the pass window. "Medium, no onions," he called, his voice carrying over the steady crackle of the grill. Emily nodded, wiping the edge of the plate with a napkin until the rim caught the light. "Clean lines. Always." "Got it," she said, lifting the plate with her left hand while balancing 2 more on her right. She was halfway across the floor when the sound outside changed. It was not the soft rumble of a Harley or the lazy drone of a pickup. It was the shriek of tires that had never known a dirt road. Expensive, impatient, and too loud for the desert silence. Dust curled up against the windows in protest. A convoy of black SUVs slid into the lot like predators sniffing the edge of their territory. The jukebox kept singing, though its voice wavered once. Emily glanced up, a small crease forming between her brows. She saw reflections of black-tinted glass and white teeth. When the door opened, a blast of heat and perfume invaded the diner. The scent was sharp, something citrus and synthetic that clashed with the warm smell of frying bacon. They entered laughing, not because anything was funny, but because they knew their laughter could fill a room faster than respect. Rich kids, maybe 20 at most, each of them sculpted and sunburned in ways that cost money. In front was Tyler Hayes. Everyone in town knew the name because everyone had heard of his father, a man who owned too many buildings and not enough decency. Tyler walked like the floor belonged to him. His shoes were spotless, his smile rehearsed. "Hey," he said, snapping his fingers once. "Service." Emily set down the coffee pot gently. She did not rush. "Welcome," she said, the smile returning to her face like a reflex. Sit wherever you like. They chose the middle booth, right under the brightest light. People who needed attention always did. Tyler leaned back, draping one arm over the seat, as if he were in a photograph. His friends sprawled around him, their laughter bouncing off the walls. "What's fast?" one asked. "Burgers in 6 minutes. Grilled cheese in 4. Pies ready now." She remembered their order without writing anything. Remembering meant control. Control kept the walls standing. At the counter, a group of men sat quietly with coffee that had long gone cold. Their jackets were heavy, worn smooth at the elbows. Their patches faded, but still sharp under the neon. They did not talk much. They didn't have to. The sound of their boots shifting on tile was enough. They were the kind of men who didn't need to announce who they were. The town called them dangerous. Emily called them regulars. They called her family. She served the burgers. 3 plates balanced on her forearms. The plates were warm, the air thick with grill smoke. When she reached the booth, Tyler looked up with lazy disinterest. "Medium. No onions," she said, setting his plate down in front of him. He frowned as if the food had insulted him. "This looks like garbage." The others laughed. The sound was high and hollow. "I can replace it," Emily said. She felt the heat of the grill still clinging to her forearm. "No problem." Tu la smirke, eyes scanning the room to make sure everyone saw him. He leaned back farther, tilting his head, the smile sharpening. Then he spat. The sound was small, almost nothing, and yet it filled the room like a thunderclap. A dark, wet mark bloomed across her apron, just above her waist. For a second, she could smell it. Coffee, oil, and something acidic she did not want to name. The jukebox faltered. A string buzzed, skipped, then went silent. Emily looked down. 1 heartbeat. 2. Then she reached for the cloth tucked into her waistband. She wiped the stain once, twice. The motion was smooth, practiced, not hurried. She did not want to give the stain the dignity of urgency. When she looked up, her face was calm, but her eyes carried the quiet burn of someone holding a storm behind her ribs. "I'm sorry, Seer," she said. The words were flat and ironed, smooth. Her voice broke something invisible. The laughter died. The teacher at booth 2 put her fork down. Manny stopped moving behind the grill. Somewhere, a spoon slipped into a saucer and stayed there. The silence grew until it felt physical, until Emily could feel it pressing against her shoulders. At the counter, a chair scraped back. The sound was deep and slow, like a warning growl. Another followed it, then another. Wood against teal, boots shifting weight. The rhythm was measured, patient, and unhurried. Emily did not turn. She kept her eyes on Tyler. She wanted him to see that she would not look away first. His smile faltered. He tried to laugh again, but the sound came out wrong, caught somewhere in his throat. His friends looked toward the counter, then quickly looked away. The air had thickened too much to swallow comfortably. Emily's hands shook once. A quick tremor she stopped by pressing them flat against the table. Her fingertips left small, damp circles on the surface. When she lifted them, the marks gleamed in the light like faint halos. "Would you like anything else right now?" she asked, her tone steady. Tula blinked. He opened his mouth, but whatever words he had found earlier were gone. He looked like a child who had wandered into the wrong house. Behind Emily, the low hum of leather and breath gathered strength. The men at the counter rose one by one, the sound of chairs surrendering their grip on the floor like old thunder rolling in from somewhere far but getting closer. The jukebox tried to resume its song, but even it sounded hesitant. Emily did not move. The fabric of her apron clung to her stomach, heavy with moisture, but she did not step back or forward. She simply stood in the exact center of her humiliation and refused to crumble. Tuller shifted, eyes flicking toward the movement behind her. He swallowed. She could sense the space filling behind her now. Heat. leather, the faint smell of oil and metal, not anger, something heavier, a collective breath, waiting to decide what form it would take. The teacher whispered her name again, a soft plea. Emily gave a small smile, the kind that said, "I am fine," and the kind that no one truly believed. The next sound was simple, the quiet clack of a cup being set down. Then another. The men began to walk forward, not fast, not loud. Boots met tile in a steady pattern. Emily exhaled. Her shoulders eased. The smallest fraction, not in surrender, but in relief. The world had witnessed, the silence had spoken for her. The jukebox's needle found its groove again, humming an old tune that did not fit this new air. Tyler's fingers drummed against the table, an unconscious rhythm of fear. The boots reached the midpoint of the diner, and the air seemed to vibrate. Emily kept her head high. Her heart thudded, but her hands stayed still at her sides. Whatever happened next would not undo her composure. The moment had already taken what it wanted from her. Behind her, chairs finished scraping. Boots finished moving. Then the sound became something larger. 50 bodies shifting as one, calm and sure. The weight of quiet justice gathering shape, and the room changed. The sound of boots still hung in the air when Emily finally moved. The whole diner seemed to lean on its elbows, listening, waiting for something to break. Sunlight glared off the chrome napkin holders and silver cutlery, drawing lines of white across the tables. Outside, the world stayed still, as if even the heat dared not breathe too loudly. Behind her came the soft, heavy rhythm of movement, leather creaking, metal brushing metal, the faint rattle of chains against jackets. 50 men, 50 hearts beating slow and sure, filled the room without raising their voices. Robert Lawson, bare to everyone who mattered, stepped forward. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, a man who did not need to shout to be obeyed. His beard caught the dying light, streaked with gray, and his eyes carried the kind of calm that came from a lifetime of winning without noise. Emily didn't turn right away. She stood still, her apron stiff with the drying stain that had humiliated her minutes before. She could smell it, sour and burnt into the cloth, and beneath that, the faint scent of her father's cologne on her skin. Her chest ached, but her face did not move. Then Bear spoke. "You got something to say to her, kid." His voice was quiet but deep enough to touch the walls. It didn't echo, it landed. Tyler blinked, still half reclined in the booth. The false confidence on his face began to slip, replaced by the confusion of someone who realizes too late that the rules of the room have changed. "What?" he said, the word cracking. Bear didn't repeat himself. His eyes did the work. They held the kind of patience that frightened more than rage. Tyler tried to laugh. "You're serious. This is just a joke. Nobody's hurt." Bear tilted his head, studying him as though he were something caught under glass. "You think respect is a joke?" The line hit hard, simply and unearned. Emily finally turned. Her eyes met Bear's for half a second. He gave her a small nod, a signal that she understood meant you don't have to fight alone. Tyler looked around the room and saw what Emily already knew. Every man at the counter was watching him. The patches on their jackets glowed faintly in the dim light, red and white against black leather. The air itself seemed heavier with their silence. "He doesn't know," one of them muttered. "He really doesn't." He didn't know that Emily Carter, the quiet waitress with the tired smile, had been feeding this crew for years. He didn't know that she had sat with them on nights when they came in bruised and hollow, pouring coffee until sunrise. He didn't know that she called them by name, when most people called them by rumor. He didn't know 50 Hell's Angels at the counter called her family. Tyler's breath quickened. "Listen, man, Bear cut him off without moving. "You spit on someone we respect." The sentence was light in volume but heavy in weight. Emily felt it through the floor. Tuller shifted, forcing a nervous laugh. Okay, look, I didn't mean. You meant enough, Bear said. He stepped closer, and the room shrank with him. Now you're going to make it right. Emily's hands gripped the edge of a table. Bear, she said quietly, please. It's done. He looked at her, his expression softening for a second. No, Emily, it's not. Her breath caught. She wanted to tell him she didn't need defending, that drawing more attention would only make things worse. But the truth was, she was tired. Tired of pretending that dignity didn't cost her something every day. Bear turned back to Tyler. Tomorrow morning, he said, you come back here. You work. You clean. You serve. You learn what respect means. Chula style. Blinking fast. Work here. You're out of your mind. You can't make me do that. You think money's going to keep you safe? Bear asked. Tuller swallowed. You know who my father is. Bear nodded once. I know. That's why you're like this. The men at the counter chuckled quietly, not in mockery, but as though they'd seen this movie before. Emily felt the moment pivot. Tyler's face flushed red, then pale. His fingers twitched against the table edge. She noticed how young he suddenly looked, stripped of the swagger that money bought him. Bear leaned closer, his voice dropping lower. You'll be here at 7. Don't test that. Outside, one of the bikes roared to life. A single sound, quick and sharp. The message was clear. Emily wanted to say something, anything to ease the tension, but the words wouldn't come. Her throat was tight. She reached for the cloth on her apron and began to wipe the table. Though there was nothing left to clean, the small motion steadied her. Tyler stood abruptly. His knee hit the underside of the table with a dull thud. This is insane, he muttered. You people can't tell me what to do. Bear didn't move. His silence filled the space like gravity. Tyler's friends had already begun edging toward the door. One of them whispered, "Thank you. Let's just go." When Tyler finally turned to leave, Bear said, "You'll be here in the morning." Tyler froze for half a heartbeat, then pushed through the door. The bell gave its tired ding. Outside, the line of Harleys gleamed under the afternoon sun. Engines rumbled to life, one by one, a rolling growl that made the glass tremble in its frame. Emily exhaled slowly. Her knees felt weak. She moved toward the counter, needing something to hold. Manny peeked out from the kitchen. "You all right, Em?" She nodded. "Yeah." Her voice was soft, but steady. "Yeah, I'm fine." Bear looked at her, reading the lie but not calling it out. "You did good," he said. She shook her head. "I didn't do anything." He smiled slightly. "Exactly." He pulled a few bills from his wallet and dropped them beside the register. "We'll be around tomorrow." "Bear, you don't have to." "Yeah," he said, heading for the door. "We do." The rest followed, boots tapping the floor like a steady drumbeat. When the last one left, the diner felt both emptier and safer. Emily stood by the sink, the rag still in her hand. She turned on the water and rinsed it until it ran clear. The sound filled the silence. The spot on her apron had dried into a pale shadow. She pressed her palm against it, feeling the texture of the fabric, then reached into the pocket beneath. The folded pharmacy receipt brushed her fingers. The ink on it was smudged but legible, numbers that decided whether her father would sleep through the night. She stared at it for a long time before slipping it back. Bear had seen her touch it earlier. She could still feel his gaze, the way he'd noticed everything without asking. It was the kind of noticing that didn't pity, it respected. Through the window, she could see the men starting their engines, one by one. The bikes growled awake, a chorus of power wrapped in restraint. Bear swung a leg over his Harley and looked back once through the reflection on the glass. His chasm at Hers, a silent exchange that said, "You're not alone." Then he put on his helmet, and the sound of 50 engines rose together. rolling through the desert like thunder, heading somewhere else. Emily watched until the last glint of chrome disappeared down the highway. The light outside shifted toward gold, softening the harsh edges of the afternoon. She untied her apron, folded it neatly, and laid it on the counter. The cloth was still warm from her body. When she finally sat, she let herself breathe. The diner smelled of coffee, steel, and something else now, something like justice. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long while, she felt the quiet settle around her, not as emptiness, but as promise. The jukebox started again. Same song, same soft twang. Only this time, it didn't sound lonely. Even after the roar of engines thinned into the distance, the diner kept the shape of their sound. The way a skillet keeps heat after the flame is gone. Steam drifted from the coffee machine in thin curls. Grease on the grill sighed like a tired thing. Emily rinsed the rag until the water ran clear, wrung it once, and folded her apron so the stiff stain became a quiet ghost rather than a flag. The room began to breathe again. Forks tapped, low talk returned in gentle threads. The jukebox found the groove it had lost and pretended it had never stuttered. Manny slid a ticket onto the order wheel. The tiny click felt louder than it should. He did not look at the middle booth as he did it, but Emily understood anyway. Tyler did not leave rooms behind when he left them. He left weather. She moved because motion steadied her wrists and gave her thoughts a lane. She topped off the teacher's water glass, wiped a smear of ketchup into a pale shine, nudged a salt shaker to sit square with its mate. The little rituals made the place feel held. With each touch, the static in her ribs lowered another half notch. The doorbell rang with a quick, bright note, as if the metal tongue inside had been surprised. Sunlight poured through and made a white stripe across the floor. Tyler stood in it like a cutout, two friends shadowing his shoulders. He had not gone far. He had not gone long. The smirk had returned to his mouth like bad muscle memory. They came in louder than the room required, wearing their laughter as armor. That sharp, expensive scent rode ahead of them, citrus, and something clinical that did not belong to hot coffee and bacon air. Tyler hauled a chair from a nearby table and swung it around to straddle the back. His friends flanked him in practiced formation. Their posture did not say, "We are customers." It said, "We are here to be seen." Thought we were done. Manny muttered to the steel, the words too soft to travel. Emily set the water pitcher down and dried her palms on a clean towel. She did not reach for the folded apron. She did not need its weight. She wore procedure instead. "Back so soon," she said, voice as smooth as poured coffee and just as hot if you were careless with it. Tyler tipped his head like the ceiling might prompt him. "We forgot to settle up," he said. "Would not want you calling the cops, sweetheart." The endearment tried to curve like sugar and failed. Emily slid the check to the edge of the table. She set a pen beside it, aligning the paper's top edge. With the light, the pen was cheap. The cap cracked a little at the clip. Straight lines were a handrail. Tyler glanced at the total and laughed, as if numbers were always a good joke. He peeled bills from a roll with little snaps, dropping them one by one, so each floated to the laminate, like lazy leaves. "That cover it?" he asked. "It will," she said. She did not touch the money. It sat there, humbling no one. He waited for a thank you that did not come, and the silence that followed was not the heavy verdict from the counter earlier. It was simply a refusal to feed his line. Tyler leaned forward. "About the rest," he said, like they had been negotiating instead of breathing in the same room. "The 7 in the morning nonsense. My father will love that story." He grinned, then lowered his voice as if secrecy made them allies. "I make a call. The place gets a makeover. New tiles, new music, maybe someone up front who knows how to smile." Emily's eyes flicked to the jukebox, even though she did not need to. The old box sat in its corner like a loyal dog. In her head, the new version looked wrong and sounded worse. "Tiles are fine," she said. "So is the jukebox." "You do not get it," he said, and the grin flattened into impatience. "Do you know what happens when I make a call?" She felt the tug from the folded receipt in her pocket, the way a tide tugs around ankles. She placed her hand on the counter's edge so she would not reach for it. The part of her that counted medications understood what calls could rearrange. The part that counted cups did not blink. "People answer," she said. "Then the sun rises anyway." His friends snorted. "You hear that?" one said. "She thinks she is witty." Emily spun the pen once between her fingers to bleed away the tremor and set it back beside the check, parallel to the paper's edge. Evenness was shelter. "Tomorrow," she said. 7. Color rose and fell in Tyler's cheeks, like a signal that could not decide. He glanced toward the door. In the glass, the lot reflected like a shallow mirror. On the shelf by the exit, a neat line of helmets faced one way, curved shells catching late light. The row looked like a small altar to patience. He cut his eyes away quickly. "We will not be here all night," the teacher at the window said without lifting her gaze from her plate. Her tone was mild, the way a thin blade looks mild. "Ma'am," one of the boys replied with a grin that missed his eyes. Nobody asked. Manny let a burger slide to the pass, a shade faster than Grace. The bun kissed steel and spun half a circle before catching itself. He met Emily's eyes and gave the smallest tilt of his head. "I am here without waking anything that should stay asleep." Tyler pulled another bill and set it on top with 2 fingers. He started a sentence, stopped, and adjusted his angle. "Let us do it the easy way," he said. "What is your number?" "My number," she asked. "Your price," he said, frustration quickening his word. "For not making me be here at dawn like a dish boy." "Everyone has one." The spatula froze mid-air. Grill's sizzle filled the pause. Emily gathered the stack of bills and tucked them into the register. The drawers slid back with a hushed sigh. She counted change without looking down, the motions as honest as truth. "You owe $4.50 back," she said, and held out her palm. When he did not take it, she rested the coins on the counter, where each little circle found a ring of light. "That is not what I ask." "I know," she said. He set his phone face up like a chrome blade between them. The screen glowed with a picture of a yacht on a sea that did not smell like coffee. His thumb hovered above a contact name he angled, so she would read it. "Make me dial," he said. Emily regarded the screen the way she would a fork left crooked, then straightened the salt shaker by the smallest measure and slipped a napkin under a sweating glass. The phone stayed there, bright and hungry. The bell on the door chimed a quick double. Tyler's head snapped up, then he slumped half an inch in relief, when only heat and light entered. No thunder, no leather. "How about this?" he said, raising his voice to reach the corners. "We make a little content. I apologize. You cry. I post. Everyone forgives me. We skip the mopping part." Her jaw tightened behind the gentle shape of her mouth. She did not glance toward Manny or the teacher. She did not ask anyone to carry this with her. "I do not want your content," she said. "What do you want, then?" His voice rode up as the room slid quiet under it. The boys leaned, their smirks sharpening along the same ugly lines. "I want dinner service to go on," she said, "and I want you here at 7. He shoved the chair back and stood. The legs shrieked on tile. The jukebox buzzed a thin, wrong note, and then found its song again. For an instant, everyone looked up. It was all the space the afternoon needed to tilt again. "I am not coming," he said. "Get it through your head." He snapped a coin into the air. It spun and clattered near the counter, a small sound that arrived bigger than its metal deserved. The teacher's eyes lifted, then dropped. Manny caught his own spatula with a tight pivot that stored the spare anger in his shoulder. Emily set an empty tray down and adjusted its balance until the center held. She lifted 2 plates and slid wrapped silver beside them. She flowed around Tyler. When he stepped half into her path, he said, "Say, please," a bad echo in a worse room. She stopped close enough to feel his breath and looked at him with no heat and no fear, only clarity, and walked around him without touching. She gave him nothing to push against. A draft drew across the floor as late sun nosed the seam of the door. With it came a smell like hot metal and something almost friendly. Emily felt it as you feel a shift in weather before the sky shows it. She turned because sometimes it helps to let your eyes have what your skin already knows. Helmets lined the shelf again. They had not been there a breath ago. Now they sat in a quiet row. Some matte, some glossy, all facing the same way. Chin straps hanging like commas in a sentence that did not need words. In the door glass, the lot held more shadows than it had a moment earlier. The street had not changed color. It had changed meaning. Echo is not thunder. Echo is a reminder. Tyler saw them, and his shoulders hitched up, then slumped like a taut string losing pitch. He tried a laugh and found no one willing to harmonize. His eyes dropped to the coins he had scattered. They looked small and foolish there. "Cute," he said, and he pocketed the phone with a theatrical grin that took effort to carry. "See you at 7, sweetheart," he added, and the word fell short of where he threw it. Emily gathered the coins he had refused and slid them into the drawer. The register closed with a soft thud. She did not answer. The room's silence did it for her, strong and clean. He turned on his heel and walked toward the door, brushing the shelf with the back of his hand. One helmet wobbled and settled without falling. The sound it made was the sound of a held breath released. "Lantefellas," one of the boys said, and the word snagged in his mouth because no one was laughing. The bell gave its tired note. Heat and sunlight, and a last thin ribbon of that sharp cologne slipped in. Then the door shut, and the cooler air reclaimed the room. For a long beat nobody spoke. The jukebox sent up a ghost of static and slid into the chorus like a machine that had taught itself to be brave. Emily placed her palms on the counter and felt its cool under her skin, a steady slate beneath the pulse, climbing down from her throat. The metal taste of adrenaline thinned from the back of her tongue. Manny set a plate at the pass and cleared his throat. "Want me to flip the sign early?" he asked. "Not yet," she said. "Dinner is not done." She poured coffee, topped water, erased the wet ring from a sweating glass. Outside, the sky burned to rust and deepened toward a velvet blue at its edges. The teacher gathered her bag and left a tip that made Emily swallow, not for the amount, but for the folded scrap tucked beneath it that read in a narrow looping hand, "I will be here tomorrow." Emily folded the note and slipped it into the pocket with the pharmacy slip. 2 papers of different weight pressed together against her hip, promise and debt side by side. She pressed her palm over them and felt the difference like a fact. Customers drifted out in 1s and 2s. The room fell to the companionable noises of a place that knows how to settle itself. The cooler breathed. The jukebox hummed. Emily locked the drawer and turned off one bank of lights. Edges softened, corners warmed. The middle booth caught the last of the day and held it like a coin. She wiped that booth one more time and paused with the cloth mid-circle at the seat where Tyler had leaned. The vinyl looked like any other square of vinyl. Rooms forget faster than bodies. She finished the circle and left the surface gleaming with a shine that would dry to nothing. At the door, she checked the latch and glanced at the shelf. Helmets waited in their patient line, a chorus with no need to sing. She flicked another switch, and the window's neon pulsed warmer against the growing dark. The jukebox stuttered again, a small guitar buzz that sounded like a throat clearing before a final verse. The sound made her smile, not wide enough. Outside, a single engine turned over once and quieted. A pulse in the town's chest. Inside, the air took one measured breath, and every gaze that mattered, present and implied, found stillness on the same point, as if summoned by a bell. Only they could hear. Dawn lifted over the highway in a pale wash, the kind of light that slides under doors and tells the truth whether you want it or not. The diner met it with clean countertops and the faint sting of soap, the night air still clinging to the corners like a shy guest. Emily unlocked the door and stepped inside, the bell offering a soft note that felt more like a greeting than a sound. She moved through the dimness, one row of lights at a time, waking stainless steel to a gentle shine. A fresh apron waited on the hook. She tied it with practiced knots, fabric whispering against her waist, the string ends brushing her hips. Filters, grounds, mugs in their neat parade, napkins folded into triangles that felt like small, calm sails. The coffee maker drew breath, water whispering through dark grounds until the room warmed with the smell that always steadied her. She listened to the first drip land like a promise. The door opened without the bell a second later, the latch raised carefully by a hand that knew the room. Bear stepped in with the cool of the early desert on his jacket and a trace of gasoline that belonged to the hour. Two of his men followed and spread themselves politely, one at the far stool, one by the door, as if they had learned the choreography of quiet long ago and did not intend to unlearn it now. "Morning," Emily said, and the word fit the space. Bear set his palms on the counter and nodded once. "Coffee, please," he said, his voice low enough to let the silence keep its shape. She poured. Heat rose between his hands and his knuckles relaxed by degrees. He did not check the clock. The hour arranged itself around him. Outside, the highway sighed under a passing truck. The silver edge of the day shifted toward clean gold, and color seeped back into the world. The bells spoke properly when the door eased again. Tuiler entered alone, his shoulders tense, his hair combed like an argument. The sharp scent of cologne reached ahead of him, looking for influence and finding none. He stopped one step inside, as if waiting for the room to decide what he was. He saw Bear. He saw Emily. He kept walking because standing still would have meant something worse. "Morning," Emily said, in the same voice she used for farmers and truckers and teachers and men with too much leather and too much history. She set an apron and a pair of thin gloves on the counter and smoothed them with her palm. "Put this on." He stared at the apron as if it were a test he had not studied for. His mouth tugged, ready to make a joke that even he did not believe. He tied it anyway, the bow wrong and tight, a knot that would dig into his back as soon as he bent. He pulled the gloves on and made a small show of rolling his eyes at the fit, then saw that no one cared and gave up the show. Bear lifted his mug and set it down with a deliberate tap. "Ground rules," he said. "Phones away. Hands clean when they touch what will touch food. Listen more than you speak. Ask if you do not know. Do not perform." Tyler smirked at the last word and then left it alone. "And if I do not stay?" he asked, trying for casual and landing on hollow. "Then you will owe what you took," Bear said. "You took time and respect. Those are paid back in labor." His tone was even. It sounded like ledger lines and weather. Emily slid a small notepad toward Tyler with her finger. "We call our movements," she said. "Hot behind when you pass close. Corner at a blind turn. On your left when you cross a body. Say them like you want to be believed." He repeated the first phrase as if chewing an unfamiliar spice. "Hot behind," he said, the sound flat as paper. She nodded. "Again, like you mean it." He tried, and found a weight he had not expected in the words. Manny arrived through the back with keys in his palm and an easy salute for the room. He went to his station and began that quiet dance of knives and boards and heat. He looked at Tyler once and then pointed with his chin toward the dish pit, the way a coach points at a lane and expects the body to swim. The dish pit, Emily said, naming it so it could not pretend to be romantic. Plates come in hot. Glass sweats will cut if you squeeze on reflex. Wash, rinse, dry, stack by size. Face the same way. Gravity is the law. Respect it, and it will return the favor. You want me washing dishes, he said, the words made small by the room. I want you here, she said. Start with dishes. Bear finished his cup and nodded toward the corner where the mop leaned like a witness. After dishes, floors. After floors, baseboards. After baseboards, the bottoms of chairs. When you think you are finished, check what your hands missed. There was no thread in it, only an outline that did not shake. Tyler's breath left him in a quick sigh that meant complaint and became acceptance on the way out. He rolled up his sleeves and knocked his hip against the counter, then caught himself. Hot behind, he said under his breath as he passed one of Bear's men, and the man stepped aside without ceremony. The phrase was already doing quiet work. He tried to lift a stack of plates by their edges the way someone might lift a photograph. The top plate slid and slapped. Emily did not flinch. Balance at the center, she said. Your hands will learn. He shot her a look that searched for disrespect and found instruction instead. He tried again, and the stack held. Water roared and steam climbed his forearms in small snakes. He hissed when heat found a tender line on his wrist, and Emily reached, tapped the cold handle, and eased the temperature without comment. Thank you, balanced in the air, and did not need to land to be true. The clock hand ticked toward the half hour. The door opened on the teacher. With the cardigan misbuttoned by one, she slid into the window booth with a book she did not intend to read and said, I am here, to the table and to the air. Emily poured her coffee. No more words were required. Tyler's movements found a pulse he had not chosen. Wash, rinse, dry, stack. The words organized his body like a metronome organizes a song. The first time he said, corner, it sounded like a dare. The third time, it sounded like a warning offered to save another person from bumping a plate into a hip. He knocked two glasses together and drew a thin squeal from their rims. He winced and adjusted his grip. The glass did not break. He looked at it with the respect you give a thing that reveals where it is vulnerable. Manny slid a plate to the pass with the quiet grace of a man who does not need applause. Bear rose and took a slow walk around the perimeter. He touched a baseboard with one finger and raised a fine gray line like the memory of dust. Not today, he said to Tyler without disdain. But you will meet this. Tyler looked at the entire length of wall and swallowed a complaint he could hear before he said it. The first rush arrived like a polite wave. Boots and denim and travel mugs knocked on the counter. A farmer's dust, falling in soft sighs from his cuffs. A woman in a sun hat, with a sleeping baby that made everything quieter. Emily's path opened and closed around them in curves she had worn into the room long ago. Tyler tried to be rock and found he had to be current. Hot behind worked when he meant it. People heard and moved. The phrase stopped being a costume and became a tool that made space where there was none. A man at the counter lifted two fingers in thanks when his cup arrived, refilled without a spill. Tyler blinked as if light had changed, then nodded back. The gesture small and honest. It counted. Bear returned to his stool and leaned his forearms on the counter, like a bridge. His eyes stayed calm. After a while he spoke in a voice that slid under the rush and settled there. There is one warning, he said. It is all you get. If you walk out, if tomorrow you make this into theater, if you turn the work into a stage, we will end the show for you. Not with fists, with attention. Cameras are easy. Consequences are not. The words were cool water. They left no scorch but soaked in. Tyler's gaze drifted, unthinking, toward his pocket. "Leave it," Bear said, without looking. "Hands to work." Tyler looked at his fingers instead. The skin wrinkled from water, the nails clean in a way they had not been yesterday afternoon. He nodded once, to the hands and to the hour. Manny called a ticket. Emily crossed with a plate, her body drawing a neat arc through the tightest part of the floor. Tyler stepped back and found the right tone, corner with a firmness that opened a path. She set the plate, and the farmer tipped his hat in a slow motion that felt like a blessing. Time became a series of small, reliable tasks. The light climbed and painted rectangles on the booths. Tyler wiped counters with strokes that aimed at the stain rather than the idea of cleaning. He felt beneath the lip and found the sticky sugar line, where fingers never looked, then scrubbed until it was gone. He looked for Emily, and she gave him one nod. A coin dropped into his pocket that he would remember later without quite knowing why. Bear finished a third cup and set bills under the saucer. Nothing showy, only enough. "Lunch is not breakfast," he said to Tyler. "Come back after a breath. Drink water. Wear socks that fit." Advice sounded like the simplest luxury in the world. "Yes," Tyler said. The words sat strange in his mouth. It also felt right. He seemed surprised by both facts. The door opened, and the air lifted with a warm current. Two helmets rested on the shelf by the exit. Not sentries, only notes in a cord. The room balanced on that sound. No one pointed. No one needed to. Emily retied her apron, more out of habit than necessity. The jukebox slept, saving its voice for when it could be joy instead of armor. The coffee machine hummed like a worker content to be first in and last out. The clock kept its clean circle, and the morning slid from silver to gold. Before he left, Bear caught her eyes and gave her a look that lived between respect and reassurance. She returned it with the smallest tilt of her head. No speeches. Enough. He stood. The doorbell rang its bright note. The highway answered with a friendly growl, and the men stepped back into the day like they were exactly where they belonged. Tyler lifted a tray and moved past Emily. "Hot behind," he said again. Not for show, not for effect, simply because the words kept people from colliding. They fit him now like a shirt he had not wanted and found comfortable. The boundary was not chalk on tile or a loud declaration. It was the structure of the work itself, the rules that kept plates whole and people steady, the discipline that turned apology into action. The room had accepted it. So had Emily. And somewhere behind the steady clatter of dishes, the boy had started to as well. The light of morning sharpened into full gold, and the diner began to breathe in rhythm. The smell of butter and burnt coffee grounds filled the air. Steam from the dishwasher drifted like ghosts between the tables. Emily moved through it all with her usual calm precision, her apron already stained but neat, her hands steady, even as the day grew loud. Tyler stood at the sink, his reflection trapped in the steel curve of a pan. The heat pressed against his face. His forearms were already pink where steam had kissed them. The wrong knot in his apron dug into the small of his back every time he bent forward. He wanted to fix it but refused to give the room that satisfaction. He scrubbed, he rinsed, he stacked. The plates slid against one another in small wet sighs, and the rhythm of work began to erase the edges of his pride. The morning crowd arrived with their usual mix of routine and noise. Emily flowed among them, carrying the kind of authority that did not announce itself. She called out corners and lefts and hot behinds with quiet certainty, and people moved, before they even thought to listen. Tyler watched her once, then forced himself back to his station. Watching her work made him feel something he could not yet name. Manny shouted from the grill. The tickets came faster now, paper snapping like small flags of command. Emily poured coffee with her left hand and steadied plates with her right. The teacher sat by the window, cardigan buttoned wrong again, marking papers between sips of black coffee. Outside, heat began to shimmer over the highway. Tyler lifted his first tray. It felt heavier than it looked. Manny slid 2 plates onto it, eggs, hash browns, toast, and Emily added a mug balanced in a saucer. The tray tilted under his hands, balance in the center, not the edge, Emily said. Hips lead, not elbows. He nodded but did not answer. His breath caught as the tray trembled, then steadied. For a brief second, he believed he might actually manage this. The first delivery went well enough. The second didn't. He rounded a corner too tight and clipped a chair. The coffee sloshed, and a brown arc landed on his glove. He hissed and bit back a curse. Emily looked up from the counter, met his eyes for a moment, and said nothing. That silence felt worse than any scolding. He wiped the spill and kept moving. As the clock crawled toward noon, sweat darkened his collar. His muscles burned from the repetition of lifting, bending, carrying. The work had a rhythm that cared nothing for him. He had entered a world where effort replaced privilege, and every mistake was visible, undeniable, physical. The heat from the kitchen grew dense, sticking to his skin. His hands had begun to wrinkle like old paper from the water. The bruise under his shoulder, where the tray had rested wrong, pulsed like a heartbeat that belonged to someone else. Still, he worked. The room around him moved as one long exhale of labor. Emily cleaned the counter between orders, her movements exact and efficient. She didn't hover near him, didn't rescue him, didn't apologize for the difficulty of the work. That was the point. She could feel the small thread of pity rising in her chest, and she cut it off before it showed mercy. She had learned lived best inside structure. The rush came like a storm front. Farmers, drivers, tourists, and children. The bell above the door lost count. Manny's spatula clanged in rhythm with the ticket bell. Emily's voice held the chaos together. Tyler stepped into the current of it. Tray balanced, eyes forward. Hot behind, he said once. Too soft. No one heard. He said it again, louder this time, and a path opened. He began to understand why she said the words that way, like signals between strangers who trusted each other not to collide. But the day was long, and the body weakens before the mind admits it. He moved through the aisle again, tray loaded with 3 plates and a basket of fries, his shoulder aching, his grip slipping from sweat. A child in a booth near the window let out a sudden laugh, high, bright, innocent, and Tyler turned his head before he could stop himself. The tray tipped. He corrected too fast, then too far. For one suspended moment, the world balanced between success and failure, and then gravity chose. The first plate fell, cracking cleanly in 3 pieces. The second followed, catching the light like a warning. The third hesitated just long enough to make hope cruel, then shattered across the tile. The sound wasn't loud in the way shouting is loud. It was clean and final, like truth hitting air. The room stopped breathing. The conversation at every table cut off in the same heartbeat. The baby in the corner didn't wake, but even its sleep went still. Emily did not rush to him. She did not sigh or scold. She stepped forward until she stood a few feet away from the broken plates and the mess spreading across the floor. The smell of eggs and oil mixed with the sharpness of ceramic dust. "Broom is there," she said softly. "Watch your shoes." Tyler stood frozen, tray still in hand. For a second he looked like he might deny what had happened, might try to laugh it off, but the sight of the shards on the floor stopped him. He set the tray down. He bent. He swept. Slowly. The bristles whispered across the tile, pulling together the fragments of his own mistake. When his hand reached for a piece too sharp to lift, Emily's voice came again. No. Use the pan. He obeyed without thinking. The room remained hushed, but the silence had changed. It wasn't judgment anymore. It was patience. Man didn't curse. He simply turned back to his grill and flipped an order with the same steady rhythm. The teacher closed her book on a finger and waited. Emily stayed near enough to see, but far enough not to interfere. When the floor was clean, Tyler tipped the dustpan into the trash. The fragments hit with a sound like punctuation. He straightened, breathing hard, face pale under the kitchen light. He looked at Emily, not for forgiveness, not for pity, but for something simpler, a way forward. Wash your hands, she said, then come back. He nodded. His throat clicked when he swallowed. He turned to the sink, ran the water, watched the dirt and oil wash away. When he returned, the tray was already set out for him again. Emily handed it to him. He took it carefully, both hands, as though holding something alive. He breathed once, twice. The work continued. The bell rang. Conversations rose again in strands, cautious at first, then natural. Manny called new orders. The teacher smiled into her cup. The jukebox stuttered, coughed, and finally found its song again. Emily watched him cross the room, lighter now, not because the weight had lessened, but because he had learned to carry it differently. He didn't look up when he passed her, but she saw the difference in his shoulders, the way they settled into effort instead of fighting it. When the rush faded and the heat softened, she found him cleaning the counter, tracing the edge where sugar and time liked to hide. His strokes were slow but sure. When he finished, he straightened and met her eyes. There was no arrogance left there, just exhaustion, and something smaller, steadier, beginning to grow. The room exhaled. The day did not end, but it no longer felt like punishment. Emily poured him a glass of water, set it down, and said nothing. He drank. The air around them hummed with the sound of plates being stacked, the quiet after noise, the calm after the breaking. Outside, the sun leaned west. Inside, Tyler set the empty glass down, nodded once, and returned to work. He took the tray again. He breathed, and this time, the floor held him. By late morning, the day settled into its low, steady hum, the kind of sound that sits under conversation and keeps the room together. Heat pressed its palm to the windows. The cooler sighed in long, even breaths. Coffee spoke in small burbles. Emily moved through it with practiced ease, tracing the same quiet geometry she had drawn since dawn. Her niece kept neat score, a tally of small turns. The thin stitch in her side awry made its case, and faded as she eased her pace by a fraction. The body kept its own books. Tyler worked with his head down. The knot at his back had loosened, not because he had taken time to retie it, but because effort had taught the string to give. Steam had kissed his forearms pink. A narrow red line crossed the base of his thumb where a plate had argued with him and won a small point. He rolled a shoulder and checked the ache beneath the arc where the tray sat. The bruise had softened from sharp to steady. It no longer felt like a complaint. It felt like a meter. Emily passed the pass with a stack of napkins and let two slip to the edge without a word. Mercy is something you set within reach. Tyler pressed the soft paper to the sore place in his palm and kept moving. He did not look up to thank her, and did not need to. The gesture belonged to the work, not to either of them. The teacher sat in her window booth, cardigan buttoned wrong in a new way that felt like the same intention. A stack of papers waited under her hand. When Emily refilled her cup, the woman lifted her eyes and gave the same two words she had given since the day of the spit. I am here. The words landed in Emily like warm stones set in a pocket. She nodded once, and let the moment carry the rest. Middle hours lean rather than sprint. Orders still came, but with thicker steps. Manny worked the grill with one sleeve rolled and one sleeve down, a habit that had outlived explanation. His voice dropped to a humane register, tickets more whisper than clack. The room took on the smell of butter and heat and old steel doing honest work. Emily wiped the counter in precise arcs until the hidden sugar line surrendered. The motion calmed the small acid knot that sometimes rose when the noon sun set its weight on the roof. She listened to the diner hold itself together, a spoon tapping porcelain, a fork skittering and finding its place, Manny drumming the grill edge twice out of reflex and luck. The tip jar waited by the register, glass belly smudged by the day. The torn paper labels still clung, handwritten and shy. During the rush, it had been a little pond worrying under the door's draft. Now it rested lower than her memory wanted. Emily did not count. Her hands knew measures her mind did not ask for. She smoothed the top bill with a thumb and stepped away. Tyler carried a stack of plates balanced on his forearms. His wrists held the right angle this time, palms set to the imagined center rather than the rim. He said hot behind in a tone that split the difference between asking and informing, and the aisle opened like a thought, finishing itself. He edged by the teacher's booth, and she leaned back without glancing up, two bodies offering each other room like a practiced bow. A farmer with dust in his cuffs folded his tip into a narrow strip and tucked it beneath the sugar caddy, as if hiding a letter. Emily slid the bill into the jar without ceremony. Everything did better as part of the same quiet choreography. Tyler watched the bill disappear. His mouth tightened, not in anger, but in some smaller calculation that had nothing to do with pride. Emily's fingers found the folded receipt in her apron pocket. The paper's corners had grown soft from being handled. Ink still held its argument in patient black. A message lit on her phone, a small blue light nudging her memory toward the pharmacy. She slid the phone back. Later. First the room, first the plates, first the people. Steam rose around Tyler as he returned to the sink. His hands had gone pale from water and work. The nails looked new on his fingers, as if he had borrowed hands from a boy who lifted things that mattered. Wash, rinse, dry, stack. The words shaped his arms into motion. He checked the chair feet for gum and found a dead fly on the baseboard and removed it with a napkin. Not tender, yet respectful. The line between fussing and care had begun to move. Near the turn toward afternoon, the bell gave its clean note, and Bear put a quiet shadow through the doorway. He did not cross the room. He read it. His gaze found Emily, asked nothing, and moved on. He tapped the helmet shelf once with his knuckles. Not a warning, a chord. Then he left as softly as he had arrived. The day felt steadier for having been noticed. Tyler let out a breath that did not sound like relief so much as acknowledgement. The room had kept its balance on its own. At the pass, Emily set a glass of water near the ledge without looking at him. He drank and returned it to the exact dry ring she had left for it. She noticed the care and felt something unclench below her ribs. A woman at the counter mentioned a sale at the pharmacy in the way neighbors do when they have shared fewer than 10 words before but know each other by the shape of their errands. 2 bottles for less. If you come on a certain day, she said. Emily thanked her and meant it all the way down. Her father would need the refill sooner than the jar would like. She did not glance at the jar. She kept her eyes on the woman. Tyler stood within earshot, shoulders angled toward his task. He listened with his face composed, and his mouth a thin line that understood more than it admitted. Manny pushed a plate forward too quick, and a triangle of toast slid toward the lip. Tyler steadied it with 2 fingers and tucked it back into the heat. He said corner as he moved into the narrow, shoulder tilting so Emily's sleeve did not catch the handle of the tray. The head learned slower than the body. The body was ahead now by a step. The light shifted. The highway sang its slow tire song. The teacher closed her folder and left her daily tip. Exact every time. Generous because it was exact. Emily tucked it into the jar and smoothed the top edge again without deciding to. Tyler saw the reflex, saw her hand, then looked back at his own. He flexed his fingers inside the thin gloves, and for a heartbeat he seemed to consider what had changed. The water at the sink cooled. Tyler set the handle to coax the heat back and kept moving. He wiped the apron of the dish pit, where water always gathered to glint and drip, wiping not for show, but to keep the floor from treachery. The rag came back gray. He rinsed it and wrung it and wiped again until it came back nothing. The rush loosened into little openings. One table cleared and another sat. The room traded breaths with the afternoon. Emily squared the register tape and rubbed the pie case glass until her reflection sharpened. Tyler approached with a bundle of wrapped silver and paused opposite the jar. It stood between them like a question that had learned patience. He looked at the jar, then at Emily, then toward the door as if some answer might push through on a gust of heat. None came. He set the rolls of silver where they belonged, turned for the mop, and wrung it with a neat twist that did not splash. He worked the stripe of floor beneath the stools, releasing footprints from tile. When he lifted the mop, the light made a soft sheen that quickly went back to being only floor. He set the yellow sign in the center of the damp square, and did not leave until dullness returned. The act had no flourish. It was a sentence in the language of care. Emily watched from a slant, so her looking did not become a burden. Direct attention can bruise. She returned to her chart of small tasks. When he leaned the mop into its corner, she felt the room click forward one notch. Shadows lengthened along the booths. She straightened the sugar packets and aligned the creamers and smoothed her palm over the glass for the cool of it. Tyler slid behind her without brushing her sleeve and said hot behind in a voice that had lost its serrations. She gave him the inch he needed, and they shared one breath of space without remark. The body accepted what the mind would later count. Manny stapled a ticket with one neat bite and lifted his chin toward the jar and away again, the action of a man pointing without pointing. Emily followed the gesture and saw a boy with a backpack stop to read the label, fish a single coin from a pocket, and drop it with a grin too big for its sound. Tyler watched the coin fall, and something subtle altered in the angle of his face. Not a new expression, a new way of holding the old one. The room quieted for one long moment. The reminder on Emily's phone scratched again at her pocket. The pharmacy would turn from helpful to closed if she waited much longer. She counted the tasks left, counted who was where, and measured the space between now and later. Manny could hold the line. The teacher could see without interfering. Tyler stood at the counter rolling a napkin into a tight scroll and letting it loosen. A nervous habit turned mechanical practice. "I need a short step out," Emily said to the room and to the hour. Pharmacy run. No flourish. No apology. Tyler did not play at bravado. He set the napkin down and slid behind the counter, like he had been there for longer than truth allowed. "Corner," he said, almost gentle. Manny lifted 2 fingers. The teacher raised her cup. Emily untied her apron and smoothed it on the counter. She took her phone and the warmed receipt from her pocket. The paper felt like a thin living thing in her palm. She tucked both into her bag and reached for the latch. She looked back because habit asked her to, and because trust is both a choice and a check. Tyler was already on the floor with a water glass tilted just so, careful of the sweating ring it wanted to leave. He caught her glance only in the window's reflection. heat and light bending his shape into hers, and then letting go. "I will be right back," she said, to Manny, to the teacher, to the room, and to Tyler, without raising her voice. "You have it." He met her eyes. He did not reach for a smile. He did not own. He gave two plain words, soft and level. "I do." She stepped into heat. The bell made its small, true note. The highway answered with a friendly low. The door settled behind her, and the diner kept its own time. Inside, Tyler set a glass down without a ring, glanced once at the jar, not for tally, for measure, and tightened the apron knot at his back by the smallest fraction, enough to hold until evening. Evening took the heat apart and laid it down in long strips of blue. The diner softened under neon, the sign humming like a throat clearing before a song, stainless dulled to a gentler shine. The cooler breathed in slow pauses. The jukebox kept quiet, as if saving its voice for a different kind of night. Emily came back from the pharmacy with a paper bag tucked under her arm, light as a bird that might lift off if she let it. The door gave its clean bell. Manny looked up, tipped 2 fingers, and went back to the grill's last small chores. A pair of travelers lingered over pie. The window held the desert like a postcard no one would ever mail. "You are good," Manny said, making it more truth than question. "I am," she answered. "Thank you." She set the bag beneath the counter where her hand could find it, without her eyes needing to. When she straightened, she saw Tyler at the far booth, wiping vinyl the way you aim at corners when you are done pretending the surface is all that matters. His apron knot lay flat, right this time. He felt her glance, and did not stiffen for show or slacken for spite. He said hot behind, as he slid past Manny, the phrase, "Easy now," and Manny moved a shoulder without looking. The last plates went out on a tide that meant to be calm. The tip jar swallowed its final coins. A couple came in for coffee to go, left with heat in paper cups, and the bell's note folded behind them. Emily wiped the counter. The sugar line that always hid there surrendered without a fight. She clicked off one row of lights and then another, leaving a slender lane of glow for closing. "Good night," she told Manny. 2 fingers again. His whole farewell. Outside, the desert turned to a soft engine. Crickets set a small metronome in the scrub. Neon painted the lot in shallow water blue. The air held warm rubber, cooling metal, and the ghost of coffee. She locked the door and felt the latch take. The glass threw her reflection back with neon stitched over it like a loose scarf. She lifted her bag and stepped into the evening. Tyler stood at the edge of the light the window spilled. He did not step forward or lift a hand. His hands stayed in his pockets as if he meant to keep them from doing anything careless. Work and heat had softened the comb lines in his hair. His knuckles were pale and clean. The thin cut at his thumb had quieted from angry to honest. Emily paused with the door at her back and looked at him, the way you look at a road before you cross it. Not cautious, exact. "Evening," she said. "Evening," he answered. Silence held for a breath. A moth tested the neon, thumped the glass once, twice, then rested, wings beating a shadow. "I did not wait because of him," Tyler said, meaning bear without saying the name. "I waited because I need to say something." "All right," she said, not giving or taking any more room than the night offered. He took one hand from his pocket and let it hang open at his side. He held her gaze and did not hunt for softer ground. "I was cruel," he said. "I treated you like an object. I spat on you. It was not a joke. It was not a mistake. It was me. I am sorry." The night received the words and laid them where they fell. No hecho. No theater. He reached for no reasons. He did not lift old shields. Did not name the father whose money had always come when called. He stood with a boy's face made older by truth and waited where patience could find him. Emily felt the apology arrive in the body, not the air. It touched the place where shame had set and cooled, and it knocked once. She measured the moment. No cameras, no helmets, no crowd, only neon, moth, and the highway's low thread of sound. She looked at him until she felt the truth. Finish walking the last feet toward them. Thank you for saying it, she said. He swallowed. I do not expect you to forgive me. She almost smiled, a small seam easing. Expect has nothing to do with it, she said. You were cruel. I was humiliated. That does not unhappen. Forgiveness is not an eraser. He nodded. A movement that cost and paid at the same time. He opened his mouth and shut it again. He was learning where silence did better work. She shifted the bag and felt the receipt slide within it, like something small and alive. Daylight flickered through her mind, the crash of plates. His hands learning words that keep people from colliding. The boy with the coin at the jar. Tyler watching without reaching for performance. Her father's pills in a neat line, the way the knot in her side eased. When she saw him set a glass down without leaving a ring. You came back, she said. You worked. You listened. You hurt when the work asked you to. That does not pay a debt, but it changes what the debt means. I will keep coming, he said. The words were plain, pulled out of him rather than posed. Good, she said. He looked past her at the diner framed in neon. A question formed and faded. Whatever he might have asked did not belong to this hour. There is something else, he said after a breath. I almost brought money, an envelope, but Bear told me not to try to buy back what I broke with the same thing I used to break it. He told me to show up, do the work, learn what respect weighs. So I will not hand you an envelope. Not like this. I will do the work first. She heard Bear in the sentence, and felt the unexpected ease of a line drawn by someone else. The kind that lightens what you carry because it holds shape around it. The moth beat at the glass again. Small sound. Small insistence toward light it could not enter. Come, she said, and stepped off the neon pad. Above the highway, the sky showed first stars, not enough to make patterns yet, enough to widen the dark. She walked to the edge of the lot, where asphalt gave way to dirt, and the ground warmed her ankles, and he followed, stopping short enough to leave the space he had learned to leave. When you spit, she said, laying the sentence down like items on a table. I kept moving because that is how plates stay whole, and people do not spill. It was the only thing I owned right then. I hated that about myself. I wanted to shout. I did not. I am tired of being good because the world expects it, and not because I choose it. You chose it, he said, not making a poem or a prize out of it, only naming it. I did, she said after a beat. It was the choice that let the day finish without more harm. But do not mistake quiet for easy. Do not mistake patience for weakness. It cost. It always costs. He nodded, absorbing the part he had missed. Back when money told him a different story about cost. He tipped his face up to the stars like a person who does not know their names and knows they deserve names anyway. I am sorry, he said again. Smaller now, truer for being the same. Not a new line, the same line. Given time to settle, she let the second apology rest beside the first. Two pieces that would never be one plate again, and did not need to be, only not cutting the hand that touched them. Work tomorrow, she said. Morning, you will be here. Yes, you will say the words. You will carry what is yours and hand off what is not. You will listen. You will make mistakes that are newer than yesterday's. You will clean what your hands missed. You will not ask the room to clap. A corner of his mouth moved and then stayed. Yes, he said. The highway sent a low truck song through the scrub. The neon hummed. The moth tapped, tireless and unchanged. A warm breeze carried the faint echo of rain from nowhere. He saw the pharmacy logo on the bag then. He did not point with word. He only saw, and she saw him see, and for this hour that was enough. "All right," she said, with a closing that was not dismissal. "Get home. Drink water. Wear socks that fit. Bear will be pleased." He let out a breath that might someday be a laugh. "I learned that," he said. "Socks and water. Good." She turned toward the road, then faced him once more. "One more thing," she said, and the night stilled so the sentence would not shake. "Do not mistake my acceptance of your apology for ownership of your chain. That is your work. If you stop, the apology belongs to no one, not even you." "I will not stop," he said. No oath. "Ah, decision." She weighed the sound and found it enough for tonight. "Good night, Tyler." "Good night, Emily." She walked the shoulder toward home, the paper bag tapping her hip to keep time. Behind her, Manny cut the last switch and the neon softened. The stars thickened their scatter. The road kept up its quiet whisper. Tyler stood a breath longer than he needed to, as if holding the dark might help the apology keep its shape. Then he turned to his car and moved with the stiffness that comes from work and not from performance, and drove slow because the night asked it. At the corner where highway met the narrow street to her house, Emily looked up again. The sky was not generous, only exact. She felt the apology settle like starlight, far and real, not the point of light itself, but proof of something large holding steady where no hand could touch it. She let go of the breath she had kept since afternoon. When a boy learned the words that keep people from colliding, the paper bag crackled. A small sound. She lifted it, felt its weight, and walked on. Morning came in soft and honest, a pale wash that made steel look kind and edges less sharp. The diner hummed in a low register. Half awake, Emily stood with an untied apron in her hands, the strings lying quiet across her fingers. She set cups in their row and fitted a paper filter, like a small white flower, into the basket. Water found heat and began to whisper. Beneath the register, the small pharmacy bag waited where she had left it the night before, a light weight that her body had already accounted for. The latch lifted once without the bell. Bear stepped in with the cool of early desert clinging to his jacket and the faint trace of gasoline that did not try to be noticed. He paused, just inside, and read the room the way weather reads open ground. His gaze met Emily's. He tipped his head in a greeting that did not disturb the quiet. She answered with a nod and tied her apron, the knots even and flat along her spine. The bell found its voice on the next opening. Tyler entered with the light behind him. No chorus at his back, no bravado left to burn off. His hair was combed because mornings ask for that. He wore a shirt, softened by soap and time, sleeves buttoned but loose at the wrist. His hands were empty for a heartbeat, then naught. From the inner pocket of his jacket, he drew an envelope, long and cream-colored, its flap sealed. There was no name on it, no mark to draw attention, only the intent in how he held it, both hands careful as if paper could bruise. Bear stayed near the door and did not grow large. He watched without leaning his gaze onto the moment. He was present the way a true witness is present, enough to keep the room steady, not enough to tip it. Emily dried her palms on a clean towel and left the counter. Light through the window cut a gentle bar across the floor between them. She stopped with her toes at that brightness and did not step over first. He bridged the last bit of space, then offered the envelope across the stripe. Both hands, na flourish, wrists clean, shoulders level. She let the envelope exist there for a breath. She looked at him, then at the paper, then at the ordinary air turned exact by intention. When the room steadied under her ribs, she reached with her fingertips and took it, feeling the seal, the weight, the quiet stiffness of thick stock. Sometimes texture tells truth before ink does. "Thank you," she said. "Nothing more fit yet." She carried it back to the counter, and set it where a square of sun had laid itself down. The envelope rested in that light like a small rule newly written. Emily lifted the pharmacy bag, loosened its fold, and touched the receipt through the paper as if to confirm it still said what it had said last night. She did not pull it out. She slipped the bag back and placed her palm on the laminate to meet its cool. Tyler waited where he stood. He did not shift from foot to foot or search for words. He let the silence do the work that talk would only blur. Bear's stillness held the edges of the moment in place, the way a steady hand keeps a table from wobbling. "If you want," Bear said at last, his voice warm and low. "Open it." Emily reached for the cheap pen by the register, the one with the cracked cap, and turned the envelope over. On the back flap she wrote the date in small letters that leaned into one another, then added the hour of morning spelled out the way her mind measured time on long shifts. Below that, she drew a short, careful line, a habit learned from years of logging tiny changes and small losses so they could not pretend to vanish. The pen hovered a second, breathing with her. Then paper yielded under her nail with a clean, soft sound. She slid the contents free and let them catch the light. Thick paper, watermark faint as breath, raised letters clear and modest. The name written there was hers, written in a hand that had learned to steady itself by moving plates and saying the right words at the right moment. The amount sat where such things sit, not shouting, only certain. On the line set aside to explain a purpose, a few plain words waited. "For your father's care." Her breath went still inside her chest, not from fear, but to allow the world to settle into its new arrangement before it moved again. Her fingers did not tremble. She flattened the paper with her palms, and felt beneath ink and cotton the shape of a burden shifting. She did not count what could not be seen. She counted the space it opened, the quiet it might let into the day, not to erase what came before, only to make a little room around it. Tyler watched without trying to own the moment he had made possible. The apology from the night under stars was present here, not repeated, not withdrawn. He allowed the action to rest inside the silence that dignified it. Bear stepped as far as the first tile, and no farther. With one knuckle he touched the counter's edge, a gesture like tapping a door frame for luck. His eyes asked the simple question that mattered. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Tyler said. The word was level, not brave, not small, just true. Emily looked from the check to Tyler to Bear and back again. She did not reach across the counter to theatrical ends. She took out the little book of deposit slips, its blue cover softened by years, and laid a slip in the same square of light. Slowly, with the care of a person who knows how easy it is to misplace a decimal in the heart, she wrote her name and the bank and the sum the paper promised, each letter neat, each curve exact. She slid the check and the slip into a clean envelope and sealed it with her thumb. On the front, she wrote the same date and the same hour, then set it upright in the shallow slot where she kept things that must not be lost before noon. She raised her eyes. "You do not buy the past," she said. "This does not change that day. It changes the days that follow. Thank you." He breathed out, a quiet release that made no show and asked for nothing. He did not say that he had called a bank or argued with a manager or fought with his pride. He let her thanks belong to the act and to the room. The coffee maker sighed and lifted darker breath into the air. Emily poured 3 cups. She set one by the register for herself, one within easy reach for Bear, and one at the place where Tyler stood. He hesitated no more than a heartbeat, then wrapped his hands around the heat, like a man learning to accept what a morning offers without ceremony. "There is a rule," Bear said, not imposing it, simply making sure the line was visible. "The work does not end here." "I know," Tyler said. "Good," Bear answered. He took a careful sip, carried the cup to the door, and set it on the sill with the neatness of someone who has always respected heat. Emily slipped the pharmacy bag into her larger bag and felt the shift in herself like a tide turning in a small inlet. Not lighter, truer. She reached beneath the counter and tapped the bell chain with her finger, coaxing one bright note that made the room say open. Tyler moved without instruction. His shoulders found the angle the floor asks for. He lifted a rack of clean mugs and carried them with his hips leading and his elbows quiet. When he crossed Emily's path, he said, "Hot behind." And the words fit his mouth the way a tool fits the hand that knows its weight. Bear leaned his boot against the kick plate and watched the square of sun slide a fraction along the counter's edge. Outside, the lot took its first glare. Heat would climb, the day would stretch. That was true before and after and always. He knocked his knuckles once against the frame and stepped back into the morning so the room could belong to its work. Emily stood a moment with her hand near the deposit envelope. The posture, small and private, more bow than prayer. Then she turned to the board, lifted the pen, and placed the tip to the first ticket of the day. Her wrist paused, wings held above lift, and then letters formed the first name she would call. The bell answered with a customer, a driver wearing road on his face. The door swung, air shifted, and the fragile became firm. Emily met his eyes and offered the smile. "That means we are open. We are ready. We can do this." Coffee found the cup to the shoulder, not the lip. The pour was steady. Tyler crossed with a water and set it down without leaving a ring. His glance flicked once toward the slim slot where the new envelope stood like a small promise in plain sight. He did not linger there. He returned his attention to corner and path and plate, to the sequence of movements that keeps a place like this whole. Outside, an engine turned over and Bear rolled out onto the pale road. The sound low and faithful. No line of helmets followed, no show. The witness had been enough. Inside, light moved past the sun square and left it. Emily folded a clean towel into her pocket, felt its dry weight, and let her shoulders settle. The check waited inside its paper. The receipt waited in her bag. The day took a breath. Work began. The phone on the wall began to ring just after the morning rush ended. The kind of ringing that carried distance in it. Emily wiped her hands, pressed a towel flat against the counter, and lifted the receiver. Her voice was steady, like always. "Diner," she said. Emily speaking. A man's tone came through, smooth and carved from old habit. "This is Hayes," he said. "I'd like to speak with whoever's in charge." "You're speaking with her," Emily replied. "Good," he said. "My son will be leaving your employ immediately. He won't be reporting for further duties. You'll mark him as finished." Emily's eyes shifted toward the sink. Tyler was there, water breaking over his wrists. The name on the line made him still. He looked up, and she saw the small movement in his jaw that meant don't. She pressed the phone closer to her ear. "He isn't on payroll," she said. "He's here to learn. He's agreed to it. We have work to finish." There was a pause, the kind that measures power. "Perhaps you didn't understand me," the voice said, smoother now, more deliberate. "I'm his father. I decide what he learns." Emily looked at the reflection of the coffee pot, the lines of light moving across steel. "I hear you," she said, "but he decided to be here. He works until the work is done." "You're overstepping," he said. "Let me make this easier. You'll have a delivery by noon, new counters, a full remodel. You pick the color of your tiles. My son won't mop another floor." Emily's fingers tapped the counter once. "An old reflex for grounding. We already have tiles," she said quietly, "and we already have a floor." Behind her, the bell over the door gave a single note. Bear stepped inside and leaned his back against the wall, arms crossed, the weight of quiet behind him. He nodded once at Emily, not as instruction, but assurance. "On the line, Mr. Hayes exhaled a slow, almost amused sound. "Honor is expensive," he said. "I'm giving you a chance to make it worth something." "Sir," Emily said, "because civility has its own strength, respect doesn't come at a price. It stays earned." "Put him on," Hayes said, the warmth dropping from his voice. "I'll speak to him." Emily turned. Tyler was already walking over, hands drying on a towel. He met her eyes, then took the receiver. "Dad," he said. Emily could only hear one side, but she saw the weight in his shoulders. He stood still for the first sentence, then leaned a little forward as if bracing against weather. "I'm here," he said. "I'm not leaving." The voice on the other end rose just enough that the hum of the line thickened. She caught fragments. "Humiliation. Nonsense. Wasting time." Tyler didn't interrupt. When he spoke again, his tone was calm and smaller in volume but stronger in weight. "I did that to myself," he said. "They're not using me. They're teaching me how to not repeat it. It's not a show. It's a floor. It has rules." The line went quiet for a breath. "You're being made a fool of," his father said. "Maybe," Tyler said, "but I'd rather learn from it than keep being one." The diner was still. Even Manny stopped the spatula mid-turn. "I can buy that place," Mr. Hayes said. "End this now and tell her you're done." Tyler's shoulders straightened. "She's not a lesson," he said. "She's a person, my teacher right now. Please stop." The quiet that followed was sharp. Emily watched him, seeing in the tension of his jaw not defiance but conviction. "You're throwing away everything you could be," Hayes said finally. "I'm learning what I want to be." Tyler answered, "I'll see you tonight. I have work." Before the response could come, he ended the call and set the receiver down as gently as if it were made of glass. The diner exhaled. The air rebalanced. "You all right?" Emily asked. He nodded once. "I'm fine. I should get back to dishes." The bell rang again. The air changed. A black sedan had pulled up outside, its shine too sharp for the dusty morning. The man who entered wore control, like fabric. Dark suit, narrow tie, eyes trained on everything. "Mr. Hayes." Emily said his name first, setting the balance. He scanned the diner, the chairs, the counter, the people. "So this is the place. You're the girl from the phone." "I'm Emily," she said, "and we're open for business." He stepped closer, "Then close it." His voice carried no heat, only certainty. He placed an envelope on the counter. "Consider this compensation. You'll release my son. I'll make sure your needs are met." Emily didn't touch it. She pulled the small record book from under the register, opened to a blank line, and wrote the date, the time, and 2 words, "attempted interference." She capped the pen, set it down, and met his eyes. "If you have something to say to him," she said, "he's right there." Hayes turned, his expression softened by habit. A weapon she recognized. "Son," he said, "come with me." Tyler wiped his hand, stepped from behind the counter, and stood straight. "Dad, I'm not leaving. I started this. I'll finish it." Hayes looked past him toward Bear, who had not moved. The big man's silence said everything a threat couldn't. He looked to Manny, to the teacher at her booth, then back to Emily. "What do you want?" he said. "Name the price." "We don't sell the past," Emily said. "He isn't for sale either." She poured coffee and set it down in front of him. The cup filled to the shoulder, not the lip. Her hand was steady. "You can sit," she said. "We'll call that your first lesson." Hayes stared at the cup, then at her, trying to find purchase. Finally, he lifted it, felt the heat, and set it back down. His fingers tightened once around the handle. "You think this is dignity?" he asked. "It's work," Tyler said quietly from behind her. "Dignity comes after. The room decides. Not me." The words landed in the still air and stayed there. Hayes's mouth twitched, not into a smile, but something close to it, a hesitation between anger and understanding. He slid the envelope off the counter, slipped it back into his jacket. His eyes met Emily's again. "You have my attention now," he said. "I hope you know what that costs." "Attention's free," Emily said. "Respect's earned." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Hayes nodded once. Not approval, not surrender, but something that looked like an old man realizing his son had outgrown his shadow. He turned to leave. The bell gave its single clean chime. The door closed behind him. The car rolled away, black fading into the brightness of day. Emily picked up the record book and added one more line. Outcome recorded. No change to schedule. Tyler returned to the sink. The sound of running water filled the space again. Bear straightened and tapped the counter with his knuckle. A small sound that meant good. Manny flipped something on the grill. The teacher lifted her coffee. "I am here," she said softly. Emily nodded once. Then she turned to the board, took up her pen, and wrote the next order. Outside. The heat began to climb. Inside. The diner held its rhythm, steady, exact, unbroken, and somewhere down the road, a man in a black suit learned that not every call could be answered with money. The week unspooled into a steady ribbon of heat and habit, the kind that leaves a faint shine on tile and a clean salt line at the collar. Morning light made the stainless look honest. Evening neon stitched a soft blue across the glass and asked for nothing in return. Between those hours, the diner did what a true room does when work is done right. It held. Emily moved through that holding with an ease earned by repetition. Her knees kept their quiet ledger. Her wrists knew when to soften and when to cut. The small stitch in her side visited on certain turns and left when she remembered to breathe lower. The check had gone to the bank. The receipt folded in her bag had become a record instead of a worry. Relief did not float. It settled. It widened the day without making it light. Tyler kept arriving with the morning. He tied the apron right every time now. He said hot behind and corner in a voice that people obeyed without feeling ordered. He leaned his hips into the weight of a tray and kept his elbows quiet. When he burned a wrist, he hissed and adjusted, and did not try to make a story out of it. The bruise beneath his shoulder faded, returned as a dull echo when the tray was heavy, then faded again. The body wrote its notes, and he learned to read them. Bear came and went like weather that prefers not to be dramatic. Sometimes a single helmet rested on the shelf by the door, like a cord lightly touched. Sometimes there was no leather and no boots, and still the room felt seen. Manny rode the grill with one sleeve up and one sleeve down, a stubborn rhythm that taught patience without speaking. The teacher kept her window booth, and her cardigan misbuttoned in new ways that meant the same thing, and she gave the two words whenever they were needed. "I am here." By the second morning after the call in the car, a quiet flaw announced itself. The back booth had whispered for weeks. The center post admitted a wobble when two cups sat too close together. Someone with a heavy laugh had leaned there once, and the wood had made a sound that meant not yet, but soon. Emily knew the trick of the folded napkin under one foot, and had used it more than once. A temporary truce. Tyler watched the napkin go down and the problem stay. He did not speak. He kept the counter clean, and the glasses dry, and the aisles clear. After lunch, he stood near the booth, with a wrench he had not yet borrowed, and asked a question without words. Emily nodded. The nod meant yes, and also do not make a show of this. He crouched and listened with his hands. The wrench did less than it promised. He fetched a flat screwdriver and a small square of carton from the stack near the back door. The carton became a shim, and then a bridge, and then a correction. A loosened, seated, tightened, and listened again. When he stood, The table did not wobble. He did not thump it to prove anything. He pressed the heel of his hand to the surface once, as if to say, "I know." The table answered by keeping still. Emily felt the change in the way the sugar caddy did not slide. She crossed with a cloth and polished the lip where hands rest. Silence under her palm sounded different. She met his eyes and let the recognition stand. "Nice," she said. "Not a prize. Just the right word for a simple, good thing." The week's heat pressed down, and the room refused to flatten. A driver came in dusted with road, and left a folded bill hidden under the sugar. A child pointed at the pie case, and was gently redirected by a mother whose balance had been learned the hard way. The jukebox offered a song and then thought better, and saved it for later. Tyler filled waters to the shoulder on every glass, and did not leave rings. When he moved behind Emily, he took the inch he needed and no more. She felt the air where sleeves did not touch, and thought of all the ways boundaries are a kindness. The father did not return. The landline slept on the wall. A dark sedan drifted past at dusk, and did not turn in. The room kept its shape without needing to prove it. On the last evening of that week, the heat let go early, as if it had remembered its manners. Light turned the counter into a wide, slow river. Emily thought of the first day when a tray tipped, and plates broke like a sentence said too hard. She thought of the night under stars, when apology arrived like something that had walked a long way to find its place. Remembering did not sting. It taught. Closing moved, like muscle memory. The tip jar loosened its coins and bills and sat empty and clean, ready for morning. Manny wiped the grill with a square of cloth that had known fire and lived. The teacher finished her cup, set exact change by the saucer, and left a single word on a torn slip tucked beneath the sugar. Courage. Tyler found it while wiping the table. He read, folded, and slid the slip into his pocket without performance. Emily did not see it happen. She felt the truth of it across the room. They brought down the first row of lights, then the second. Neon found the window and laid its line of blue. The bell gave one clear note as the door settled. Outside, the highway laid its low song over everything. They stood in the gentle dim, the pass light, making a narrow lane between them. Goodbyes in this room were smaller and truer than in other places. Emily folded an apron and hung it on its hook with the strings even. Tyler spoke her name without turning it into an event. She faced him. "I will not be here in the morning," he said. The sentence carried the shape of completion, not escape. "I will come back to eat breakfast and pay like any other face. And if you will have me, I will take a late shift each week until summer folds." She let the pieces of that land, then weighed them. The week had asked for a lot and given what it could. The boy before her was not finished and not on display. "You may take a shift," she said. "You will text before you come. You will not call it service. You will call it work." "Yes," he said. The small pharmacy bag in her tote rustled when she lifted it. The receipt inside made a paper sound that was record now, not plea. She checked the shallow slot where the deposit envelope had stood, and found it empty and useful again. She slipped 2 pens into the chipped mug and smoothed the tape on the adding machine, as if calming it into mourning. He cleared his throat the way people do when they would rather not speak and know they must. "I need to say a thank you. That is not a bid for approval," he said. "You kept the world from turning into a show. You showed me how to do that. If I become someone I am not ashamed to see in a window, it will be because of the rules here. That is all." She nodded. The nod said more than her mouth could carry. "Bring socks that fit," she said. She meant more and less, and exactly that. He almost smiled and let the almost go. From his pocket he brought a small thing wrapped in a napkin and set it on the counter. A tiny brass screw polished by thumb and thought. "For the booth," he said. a spare for the spare. In case Soon tries to return, she lifted it with 2 fingers and felt the clean thread. She set it in the little dish where old keys and a single ring keep one another company. The screw made a soft sound against the porcelain, like a coin, too honest to pretend to be more than it is. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. His hand rose and stayed small. He pushed the door, and the bell offered its bright note. A blessing without a name. He stepped into the blue and the kind heat that would remember them both by morning. His footsteps thinned at the edge of the lot. Emily stood for one breath, and then one more. The room around her felt exact, not empty. She checked the lock and scanned for stray light. None. She lifted her tote. The paper bag inside felt like a plan. She walked the shoulder toward home under a sky, beginning to think of stars. First points appeared like shy witnesses. The air smelled of warm rubber, and the cool promise of night. At the corner, she looked back once. The diner sat like a small ship at dock, quiet and ready. Morning arrived, the way mornings do. Too soon for those who want dreams to finish by themselves. Emily tied her apron, checked the filters, and set the cups like teeth ready to bite the day. The bell rang and the door gave the world back to her in small, ordinary measures. A farmer came first. A woman with a sleeping baby followed, the child's breath setting a soft clock. The teacher slid into her booth with a fresh stack of papers. Bear's shadow crossed and did not linger. And still, the room stood straighter for having been noticed. Tyler did not come that morning. That was right. He would come when he had said, and in the way he had promised. The room did not lean toward the door for him. It kept its own posture. When heat began to announce itself, Emily checked the back booth. The table did not wobble. The sugar did not skitter under a cup. A small square of carton sat trimmed flush beneath the mount, neat as an answer. She pressed the heel of her hand to the surface and felt the steady that cannot be seen. A little quiet opened in her chest, near closing. When the light grows blue along the street, she found an envelope slipped under the door, thin as a secret and broad as a favor. No name on the outside. Inside, a plain hand that had learned steadiness made a few clean lines. A promise to take the late shift at week's end, a note about a job at the shelter in town. Afternoons spent unloading donated crates and learning the inventory that keeps good intentions from breaking a room. No signature, only a sentence that made space without asking for more. "I will keep working." She set the note beneath the small dish with the brass screw and wrote a single line in the book beneath the register. "Late shift accepted. Shelter noted. No spectacle." She turned out the first row of lights. Then the second. Neon drew its soft thread across the window. She locked the door and touched the glass with her palm, the way a person tests if something is finished cooling. The stars above the highway were not generous. They were exact. That was enough. On the walk home, the breeze lifted and made a sound in an empty cup like a tiny bell. She went on, steady as the pour that fills to the shoulder and not the lip, carrying the last image the day deserved. A booth that no longer wobbled, a brass screw resting in a dish, a promise written in a hand that had learned better uses for itself, and a room that would open in the morning, ready to work, exact as truth. At its heart, the diner arc reminds us that dignity is not a gift someone grants us. It's a muscle we strengthen through work, humility, and truth. The story of Emily and Tyler isn't about punishment. It's about transformation. When pride collides with patience, when noise meets quiet discipline, character is forged. Real change doesn't come from grand gestures or public apologies, but from the quiet choice to show up, to listen, and to repair what we once broke, whether it's a table, a heart, or the trust of another person. In life, We all face moments when silence feels safer, when injustice tempts us to look away, or when anger whispers louder than empathy. But as this story shows, respect is not loud. It lives in consistency, in restraint, in the small acts that rebuild what was lost. As the old saying goes, you don't prove gold by talking about it. You test it in the fire. Tyler learned that lesson the hard way, and perhaps that's the only way most of us ever really learn it. If this story moved you, if you've ever found yourself mending what pride once broke, share your thoughts below. Tell us what dignity means to you, or how you found your way back to respect after a hard fall. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss more stories that remind us who we can still become. Until next time, may your days be steady, your nights quiet, and may you always find the courage to rebuild, one honest act at a time.